Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Yuta Balatovsky, and I'm a speech language pathologist living in New York City. This is our fourth webinar, and we have a very special guest this evening. We have Steve Edelson here, who is the executive director at the Autism Research Institute. He's going to present a little bit and tell us about his research and his findings, and we will ask questions and learn more. So, Steve, whenever you are ready, if you want to give more on your introduction.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Actually, I'm in San Diego, California, Southern California, and right now we're experiencing a major storm. I think, well, in Los Angeles, they have over 10 inches of rain, and here in San Diego, we're expecting anywhere between 3 and 5 inches. So hopefully, we won't have a power outage and everything will go well. But yeah, my name's Steve Edelson. I've been actually involved in autism research for 45 years. I actually started as an undergraduate student at UCLA with one of the pioneers in behavior therapy, Ivar Lovaas, and worked with him closely for several years, published a few papers, and a lot of my ideas at that time dealt with the biology, not just treatment, but what's the underlying reasons for the condition. And then Lovaas introduced me to Bernie Rimland, who was also another one of the pioneers. And Rimland and I hit it off, and we worked closely for over 30 years. Dr. Rimland was the one back in the 60s who said that autism was not caused by poor parenting, by maternal neglect. In fact, he was the only one in the world who argued for an underlying biological condition, while everyone else was arguing that the parents were the cause. And after Rimland's book came out, the whole field turned around topsy-turvy, you might say. And rather than putting parents through marriage counseling and children through play therapy, then the medical profession got involved and the psychologists and so on. And it's basically our thinking now. What's interesting, what Rimland stated in the 60s is still true today, that there's a genetic component to autism, there's a neurological component to autism, and there's also an environmental. So he said all these three things back in the 60s, and basically all the evidence supports that. However, we've learned since then that there are a lot of co-occurring medical conditions, such as gastrointestinal problems, immune problems, metabolic problems, anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, and so on. And these occurrences occur much more in autism than the average population. So we're trying to figure all these things out, and obviously it's important to see how everything fits together. But what I want to do, and then after getting back to my background, after meeting Rimland, both Lovaas and Rimland helped me get into graduate school at University of Illinois, and as a psychology, experimental psychology. And just so happens, Temple Grandin was a graduate student at the same time at Illinois. And so we got to
Wow.
know each other quite well. And we met together probably once a month and traded notes. We were the only ones in the university of probably over 40,000 people who just were interested in autism. And Temple and I have kept in touch throughout the years. We co-published a couple of papers together. I've put together a few books, and she often writes the foreword. And I usually try to see her about once or twice a year. So it's been quite exciting to know her. And then I taught for many years in Southern California. Actually, didn't like teaching. Then I formed my own research center in Oregon called the Center for the Study of Autism. And literally people throughout the world came to this research and treatment center. And we ran it for about 10 to 12 years. But then it just took a lot of time and effort, too much. And so eventually I taught again. And then when Dr. Rimland started to become ill, he and his board of directors asked me to take over the Autism Research Institute because he was quite ill. So he passed away in November 2006, and since then I've been the executive director and made some changes, but we also kind of keep the same mission, you might say, and the same path that he pointed to. So let me give you a little overview of the Institute so everyone will have a better idea of what we do, not just me, but my staff. So I'm going to share my screen. So is that okay?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, so the Autism Research Institute, you can see our website, autism.org. It's actually quite popular. There's a lot of great information, and I'll talk about some of that in a few moments.
I think I've used this website as a student, as a research,
Oh, really?
as a resource. Yeah.
Good, yeah. So I told you about Dr. Rimland and the book where he discredited parent blaming. It came out in '64. Since it received a lot of attention, he realized that parents around the country, in fact, around the world, need to start communicating with each other and sharing notes in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and that they could also work together in terms of pressuring government to start funding research, and also pressure local governments to start training teachers on how best to teach those on the spectrum. And with that, developing this network, because there was no internet in those days, he founded the Autism Society of America in '65, which is still going strong today. And then he realized that, okay, now the parents are networked, but he needs to start approaching researchers around the world to start doing research. And he also felt he needed to share information with them. So he founded the Autism Research in 1967, which was 57 years ago. So quite a long time. And so if he came across an article, he would often make 40, 50 copies and mail it to all research he knew. He would often go to universities, try to convince people to do research on autism. And in fact, with behavior therapy with Lovaas and ABA, he was instrumental in terms of letting parents know about it, as well as helping get grants to fund that research. So here's Dr. Rimland back in 1964, and this is this famous book. Actually, 50 years later, so in 2014, we republished the book. He had passed away, but what I did is for each chapter, it had a different topic, you might say. And so I invited a top researcher in the field to comment on that topic and also what is currently happening. And so you can find this on Amazon, eBay, the 50th anniversary of his book. And actually, Temple Grandin, she wrote the introduction to the 50th anniversary. So here's Dr. Rimland and his son, Mark. Actually, Mark's autistic, and almost every Sunday I go visit Mark in his group home. I usually bring him lunch, and so I keep in touch with him since I've known him since I was 19 years old. I think he was around 21 or 22 at that time. And so not the most recent, but here's a picture of them, with Dr. Rimland much older and Mark as an adult. Also, just a quick note, a lot of people don't realize that with the movie Rain Man, that Dr. Rimland was instrumental in terms of the film. What happened, he had published quite a few studies on savant abilities, including an important article in Psychology Today, where he would change the name from idiot savant to autistic savant. And so what happens when they were working on the script for Rain Man, they contacted him, not because of autism, because at that time, Raymond, or Dustin Hoffman, was intellectually challenged. and they gave it to the script to Rimland, just wanted his comments on savant abilities, and he thought they did a good job. But then I remember he called me up and he said, "I'm thinking of suggesting that the main character have autism. Do you think I should do that?" And I said, "Why not? All they could do is say no." And sure enough, they asked after he suggested that, they said, "Well, what is this autism thing?" And so Dr. Rimland with Mark went up to Los Angeles to meet Hoffman and the producers, and history was made. So that was a story that a lot of people just don't know yet.
Yeah,
So,
I had no idea.
yeah. So as far as what we do at the Autism Research Institute, so just try to throughout the years in terms of the major focus, as far as either doing research or I don't say promoting, but just making people quite aware of. So from the 1960s to the 80s, we focused on diagnosis, and Rimland came up with what he called the E2 checklist. And what's interesting with that checklist, a lot of people say, well, it's not, there's not as much research, and it fails to diagnose everyone on the spectrum. And the reason why is Rimland wrote it to diagnose a specific type of syndrome called Kanner syndrome or classical autism, and nothing else. And so as far as I know, it's still the only diagnostic tool that looks at what's called Kanner system, in which they exhibit classical symptoms of autism. Also, we focus quite a bit on behavior modification, or ABA. Also nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
We were the first ones to talk about restricted diets as an organization. We realized it was important by talking to a lot of parents, and there were a few researchers. And actually, Dr. Rimland published quite a bit on what's vitamin B6. And if you look at the literature, there's quite a bit of evidence on that as well. In the 1990s, I became more involved in the Institute because I was no longer teaching. And I, as I said, opened my own research and treatment center. And I collaborated with the Autism Research Institute. And so together we focused on sensory and biomedical interventions. So sensory, we looked at hearing, vision, deep pressure, and biomedical, mostly gastrointestinal and immune, but also we consider nutrition and diet as part of biomedical, because it does change one's chemistry. Then the 2000s, and this is one of the last major things that Dr. Rimland and I worked together on. We started focusing our efforts on adults on the spectrum because other people weren't. A lot of people were saying we need to start worrying about it, but nothing was being done. So we had these major conferences, and we'd have a track specifically to adults on the spectrum. In fact, I think all of the presentations were given by adults on the spectrum. And we also worked on a book, Adults on the Spectrum, where a lot of parents would write about their autistic adult and would indicate what they should have known when they were young, when their child was younger, in terms of preparation. And so, and then in the 2010s, we really focused a lot of attention on our website because we had done quite a bit on mailing. We had 6 workers just to fill up envelopes almost daily.
Wow.
And we usually have 4 or 5 bins. In fact, we also sold a lot of books. It was very difficult to buy books on autism for quite a long time. You'd usually have to actually write to the publisher to buy them, or go to a bookstore and have them special order it. And then we also began,
because they're just
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I had a question came up. Was it just because there was a lack of awareness, or not that many books, or because it was still kind of transitioning to a new label, or like?
Well, basically, autism for quite a long time was but roughly 1 in 2,000, or 4.5 out of 10,000. And then back in the 1990s, the research started to show that it was starting to increase. Not just awareness. Awareness is part of it, but there's actually quite a bit of increase in autism over the years. And there's quite a bit of evidence to show that. Not just researchers, but also the government is publishing clean data to suggest an increase. So there's more autism and people more aware. And then we also began webinars. Right now we have near weekly webinars on all different topics. And we, after we put them up on YouTube, and we have over 1 million views, which is quite nice. And I'll talk about webinars a little later. And then more recently, we started to expand our efforts to seniors, those 55 and older, where we wrote a major article back in I think it came out around 2000, based on a big think tank where we invited researchers and clinicians and people on the spectrum and parents from all over the world for a 3-day think tank. And then more recently in November, we had our second think tank with the same types of participants, but a lot of different people joined. And we're right in the middle of finishing up a paper, a description of what we discussed over a 3-day period. Hopefully we'll submit that within the next couple of weeks, and we'll be out there for everyone to read it in a few months. Okay. So our website with summaries of important research, assessment tools, webinars on a lot of different topics I just mentioned. We also translate a lot of articles too, because we try to reach people throughout the world. To us, an autistic child in China is just as important as an autistic child in the US. Research, we publish a quarterly science newsletter, the Autism Research Review International. We've been doing this since 1986. People could buy a hard copy, subscribe in the mail. I think it's only $20 a year, so it's almost free. But more recently, we've been putting them up online for free, though we'd also like people to donate money to us. And we're almost finished working on a major website, which will highlight all the articles in the newsletter. And it should be ready in a few weeks or a couple of months. And I think this is going to be important for the autism community. We also sponsor think tanks annually. We have an in-person one. It's usually either in April or May, where we have clinicians and researchers. And in that think tank, the researchers go up on the podium and say, guess what I'm finding with my research? And obviously the clinicians are quite interested because they want to learn how to help their patients. And then the clinicians go up and they say, guess what I'm seeing? And obviously the researcher is quite interested because it might give them more insight in terms of the condition. And we also have an online think tank that's only for discussing pretty high-level research, and we cover over a 2-day period. We haven't done it since COVID, sponsor regional think tanks. We've had it at Harvard Mass General about 5 or 6 times, also in New York at Columbia University, and we want to expand from there. And basically, we invite local researchers and clinicians to get together and discuss what they're doing. In this way, they get to know each other, better networking, and it's actually quite exciting, to tell you the truth. We fund research worldwide. Actually, we often fund this year or last year, I think it was 2 or 3 went to Italy, we had Israel, Portugal, Canada, several in the US, but we get grant proposals worldwide, and we review them just like the National Institute of Health reviews them. We also, I'm trying to see my screen, publish a monthly e-newsletter for scientists where they could learn about grant opportunities, not just from us, but from many other organizations. We also provide them links to articles that discuss conducting autism research or some of the controversies or things that we feel they should know, as well as links to all the major autism-related journals to look at the latest table of contents so they could see what articles have been published that within the last month or so. The way we support clinicians, we publish a clinical research in autism bi-monthly e-newsletter where it's actually geared toward pediatricians, nurses, physicians, but anyone could subscribe. And basically, we provide links to articles in peer-reviewed journals that are relevant to a practice for a clinician. For example, prevalence rate, health-related issues, and quite a few others. I mentioned we sponsor an annual think tank in person with clinicians and medical researchers. We also work with the Cleveland Clinic Foundation. Actually, we work in joint providership. And we have webcasts by some of the top medical researchers on many medical issues. And healthcare workers can actually obtain CME credit for watching it and then taking a test after. And we try to have 2 or 3 new webinars a year. And also parents could watch this as well. The way we connect with parents, again, we have these webinars, all different topics. We have an information resource call center. It's toll-free. International outreach. We're an NGO of the United Nations. We also network with groups, not individuals, network groups throughout the world. They actually receive a monthly e-newsletter of the most relevant research, at least that we feel that they should be aware of and that they could distribute to their membership. We also mention anything else important that we feel they should know, and again, to distribute to their members. We also sponsor clinical webinars, mostly for healthcare workers. I mentioned that earlier, where we'll have a medical researcher and after recording, and then afterward, they have a live question and answer. And that's expanding right now, but I think we're in about 7 or 8 different countries. Publications. The past few years, we've published a series of books that are somewhat related. Our understanding and treatment series. We've published one on self-injurious behavior, one on anxiety, another on sleep disturbances. And with these books, each chapter takes a different approach to these topics. For example, with all of these, there'll be a chapter written by a medical doctor, a chapter written by a nutritionist, a chapter or 2 written by a behaviorist, a chapter written by a sensory expert, and a couple on neurologists, and so on. And so they each approach these behaviors in a different way, because often there's not just one way to treat a behavior. And we have to be aware that there are many different causes for a lot of these behaviors, and you just can't try one. For example, a good example would be eye poking. There's some who go after their eyes or constantly rubbing it. Actually, I'm aware of one who actually pulled out their eye, and it's one of the worst behaviors these individuals exhibit. And what happens is that if you work with a behaviorist, they might say ignore the behavior or redirect them. Go to a sensory integration person, they might try some sensory. If you go to a medical doctor, they might suggest some medications. But what's interesting, not with every case, but in quite a few, there's evidence that they're low in calcium. And because if you look at some of the literature, if you're low in calcium, your eyes itch you. And there's been, by Mary Coleman, a study showing that by providing calcium supplements, that the eye poking behavior disappears. So if you have someone who eye pokes, rather than first try behavior modification or some medication to make them drowsy or whatever, honestly, I would first give calcium to see if that might help. So there's a lot of different reasons for these behaviors, and it's important to try to figure out why they're engaged in that. I'll tell you, related to all this, I developed an app. It's been out about a year. Actually, it's on self-interest behavior. I think it's at selfinterestbehavior.com. And basically, you answer these questions. A lot of them were based on the book. And the way you answer it, then it gives you, given this question answered yes, this might be the cause. And then it gives you links to peer-reviewed articles on how to understand it as well as treat it. And so by completing this questionnaire, you might get a better idea on how to treat this behavior. And with sleep disturbances, actually, I was working on it today, but we'll have a similar app that will probably come out within a month. And with this app, it also will help parents as well as professionals figure out how to treat sleep issues. For example, trying to fall asleep, sometimes they're looking at their iPad or video games, and that might be a different reason, trying to fall asleep compared to waking up in the middle of the night, which is a whole different issue. And so this will separate all that. I think we have a total of 39 questions on sleep disturbances. And the next one, which I hope to have finished by the end of the year, is anxiety, because I believe there's 4 or 5 different types of anxiety that those with autism suffer from. And by knowing what type of anxiety, then that might dictate the most appropriate treatment. We also published a book a few years ago on nutritional supplements, although it came out, I think, in 2016 is my memory, but still relevant today. And so that has been quite important for quite a few people. And then also with regard to publications, we also have several e-newsletters. We have one that's focused on the Institute and new things that we're working on. I think we have about over 140,000 subscribers. And then we have actually, I think I write about 34 newsletters a year. So we put out a lot of information, you might say. Okay, and then this is our office. We're in San Diego. This is on a sunny day, which is not today. And so, and I should mention straight ahead where you see the mailboxes, that's the Institute, and see the bench behind, that's my office. And to the right, you don't see much. We just opened a year ago the National Autism History Museum. Actually, if you go to nationalautismhistorymuseum.com, you'll learn about that and see a 5-minute promo, you might see, a virtual tour. And it's, as far as I know, the first autism history museum in the world. And so it's...
Yeah, I've never heard of one.
Yeah, so and we have information not just about the Institute. In fact, that's just a small part of it, but about the whole autism history. Yeah, so yeah, this is where I started off. So this is on the website, and so when you have a chance, you could take a look.
Yeah, I actually went on last week in preparation for this just to learn more. And I saw all of the webinars and I was a little overwhelmed because there was so much to learn myself as a clinician and working with this population. Every child is so different. So I feel like you could learn about children on the spectrum for there's endless amounts of information. And I'm interested to see if any of those webinars will qualify for me, because I also have to do continuing education credits, just like in the medical field. And it's similar, attending workshops, listening to webinars. So if possible, I would love to use your...
Well, what the CMEs, that's mostly for medical providers. It's a lot of work and a huge cost. As far as the other webinars, that you could get a certificate that you attended, and you still have to take a little test. But we don't offer CMEs for the regular webinars, only for the ones through Cleveland Clinic, which are for healthcare providers. Even though anyone could watch them, but as far as obtaining the CMEs, it would have to be for the healthcare provider because it does cost us money. Yeah.
Yeah, ours are called CEUs in our field.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't, we used to offer that when we had conferences, but that was quite
Oh,
a
okay.
long time ago.
Well, anyway, I was very, int I think you mentioned collaboration and just having a broad spectrum of people and professionals with giving their input. So the nutritionist gives their insight, and then the neurologist. And I think that's very, very important in this field. You need to, there's kind of like you can never really try just one approach. There's always a lot of different approaches, and likely the first one you try might not work. So it's
Yeah.
important to
Well,
have kind of.
no, you're right. And that's the reason why we developed these apps. Again, one on self-interest behavior. So if a behaviorist fills it out, they might have, like with the eye poking, they might say, yes, the child eye pokes. And then we'll find out that this could be due to calcium issues. And so by having these apps, it actually takes a multidisciplinary approach. So someone who is trained in one area will at least be aware of other possible reasons. So a medical doctor might be, by filling this out, would be aware that, oh, here's maybe a sensory intervention that might be more appropriate, or a nutritional or a behavioral or so on. And so by, because we realize not everyone could know everything about everything. And
Right.
so by doing these applications, which are based on experts, it will make people more aware of all the different reasons for these behaviors. And as I said, sleep disturbances, that should be out, I hope, within a month. And after that,
Mm-hmm.
we'll tackle anxiety. And I think after that, will probably be feeding disorders.
Mm. Um, so you mentioned earlier that there has been a recent increase in awareness and in diagnosis in autism. It's a big question, but if you could talk a little bit more about research showing why or what could the possible correlation links could be, or what people in the field have been uh, kind of attributing to this increase.
Yeah, well, many of my colleagues and myself feel that it's a interaction between genetics and the environment. It's epigenetics. We know that the closer one lives to a highway, it increases the risk of autism. The closer one lives to a farm that uses organophosphate pesticides, increases the risk of autism. The closer one lives to a hazardous waste dump, increases the risk of autism. But not everyone who lives near a hazardous waste dump or a highway or near a farm with pesticides develops autism. So we do feel strongly that there's a genetic predisposition, whether it involves the immune system, the metabolism, or whatever, we don't know yet. But we do feel there's a genetic component and the environmental component, not for all of them. In fact, research has shown that roughly 20% are only genetic. It's called syndromic, like Fragile X and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So 20% are just genetic. And over time, I'm sure there's going to be a few other syndromic autism. But right now, we assume majority, possibly up to 80%, it's a genetic predisposition to certain toxins in the environment. And it could also be stress. There's some evidence that in the mid-trimester that with given severe stress, it might be associated with autism, but we consider that somewhat environmental too, other than genetic, you might say.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I'm sure you have a list of other potential things that could cause. I know you mentioned living near a highway or the
Oh yeah,
farm.
no, there's many more. Lithium,
There's.
yeah, lithium in the water, higher lithium. And what's interesting, what's the prevalence rate is, I think 1 in 36 now, autism. And but in San Diego, a government report last year said 1 in 14. But we get a lot, there's a lot of lithium in our water because we're get our water from the Salton Sea, and that's one of the lithium reserves. And maybe there's a relationship there, we don't know. But yeah, there's quite a few different toxins out there. not just what I mentioned. Yeah.
Hmm. Wow. Um, Going through some of my questions. Um, I also saw on the website that kind of the slogan is autism is treatable, which I really liked that slogan. As somebody that is working with students and patients that I've never really heard it said that way, but I wanted to hear more about the background of that.
Well, basically, um, back in the 60s and 70s, um, with the Autism Society of America, they wanted the government to pay attention. And they actually came up, were publicizing that I think it was around 70 or 80% wind up in institutions. Later, I heard that that stat was made up. It wasn't, but it was to try to get attention. But basically, the feeling was if you have an autistic child, institutionalize them because otherwise they'll ruin your family, they'll ruin your life. And unfortunately, a lot of parents listen to that. And so, but it took time when Rimland said this is a biological condition, and that sparked a lot of research on looking at the biology as well as ABA and sensory and so on, and that these individuals can improve and benefit and you might say get better. And that's why we say it's treatable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I see it in my students for sure. I think that early intervention, if that's possible in this case, is key. And the environment is a huge factor as well. And I've seen a lot of my students make a lot of progress.
Yeah, well, one of the problems with early intervention now is that there's long waiting lists here in the US
Mhm.
and the UK and so on, and the COVID did not help things. And there was actually a study, it was in our science newsletter last year, where they compared individuals who received early intervention, I forgot what age, compared to other children, also young, who started it 9 months later. And though that 9 months made a huge difference because those who started
Yeah.
earlier made significant gains. So if you're on the waiting list to either get a diagnosis or intervention, every month could be important, and having to wait will not help things. In fact, I just wrote an editorial. I think it was my last major editorial for the science newsletter, Q4, that for people who are on the waiting list, here are things you could do to, you and your siblings and relatives and
Hmm.
neighbors and so on. Here are things you could do to get that treatment going rather than just wait and do nothing.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of resources online
Yeah.
for parents.
Yeah, but don't
Uh,
just sit and wait and do nothing. You got
Absolutely.
yeah. And if you're not sure, don't take a chance. Just you still got to do everything you can because every month counts.
Absolutely. And just even the difference between, like, I see such a big difference between a child at 12 months versus 18 months, and just
Yeah,
every month in those early developmental stages are so different. Uh,
yeah,
and I often see when I'm reading through past medical history and just reports, you can see when the students started their intervention. And there's often the students that started earlier, they're showing a lot more progress.
yeah.
So that's definitely very important. Um, we're coming into kind of the end, but I wanted to ask you if you could give us kind of a overview, just a brief. What's the most current research that you're doing? What are you currently working on, or at the Autism Research Institute in general?
Well, I don't do as much research now as I used to because I now fund a lot of research and spend a lot of time writing. Um,
Hmm.
I am working with a group on subtyping autism. And we actually, from Dr. Rimland, from his book, he had a questionnaire in the back called E1, and then he revised it to the E2. And we have over 40,000 cases documented. And we recently did subtyping, see if there's any similarities. And we found 8 pretty clear subtypes statistically. And so we're trying to write it up. And so for each subtype, we want to see what interventions are most helpful and which ones may actually worthless or harmful. Another thing that I want to get involved, but again, time is difficult right now, is to, because I see this definitely as part of the future as far as diagnosis, because right now diagnosis is pretty much based on behavior, like the DSM, the
and parent
ADOS,
report or just observation report.
and this or that. And it's not objective, but there's a lot of people looking at biomarkers, looking at the immune system, metabolism, vision, and so on. And the issue is, I really doubt there's going to be one biomarker that explains the entire spectrum. There's going to have to be quite a few biomarkers, I think, to really, but once you know objectively through a biomarker, autism or not, then I think it's going to make a bigger difference as far as what types of treatments are best given the child's condition. And so I've been wanting to work on a questionnaire, and I know Andre is aware of this to some degree, that when people fill out this questionnaire, more of a screening, and then given the responses to the questions, it might indicate, well, these are the biomarkers you might want to consider, because don't assume these biomarker tests are going to be free. They're going to be probably expensive. Insurance is probably going to try to cover it, but they don't like to cover a lot of things, especially autism related. But I could see the importance of a screening, which rather than says your child has autism or not, just said this is the type of biomarker or biomarkers you should consider to see if the child has autism or not.
What's an example of a biomarker?
Well, it could be looking at the immune system and looking at certain cytokines, if they're present or not. I know there's also looking at metabolites. That's the byproduct of a lot of cellular action. And some of them are extremely good at predicting autism or not. I know there's some on vision, the way even looking in certain ways. But yeah, biomarkers is just an objective, biologically based way to figure whether someone may have autism or not.
I think most of what we have right now for diagnosis is subjective, like you said.
Yeah.
So the objective key is objective component is definitely something that will help bring therapy to be more specific and help just treat the specific biomarker, as you said.
And rather than say, well, based on the subjectivity, if it's objective, it's very clear cut. I really think that the government will start putting in a lot more money, because they have something to sink their teeth into, because it's more focused, you might say. And although medical research is terrific, I think research in all different areas, in terms of speech language, behavioral, sensory, nutrition, there's just not one way to treat an individual.
No, and as a therapist working with students with autism, we are working with a big team. It's a big team of therapists, clinicians that are all working together, and every single person is bringing their own unique specialty to it. And I think without that, it would not be possible in where we are today. So, I learned a lot myself personally. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to learning more and reading more about the research and the findings that you guys are doing. That it's amazing. So thank you for all of your time and dedication that you've put into this very important topic.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. I wish I could do a lot more, honestly.
I've asked a lot of different questions. I feel like you've shared a lot of very helpful information, a lot of new information that a lot of people probably have never heard. If you have any questions for me or any closing thoughts that you wanted to share before we wrap it up?
Not really. I think autism has many dedicated people, and there's a lot of parents who really made a difference out there, and they continue to do so as well. But I do feel that with Autism Research Institute, we always take the high bar. To tell you the truth, we do not take any money from the government, from drug companies. We don't take any money from insurance companies. We don't take any money from any company selling services or products. We're mostly funded by parents and relatives and some foundations as well. But we try to keep as squeaky clean as possible. And we have Charity Navigator. We're always rated the highest as far as accountability and transparency. And we just and we have a very tight budget, let me tell you. but we make things work.
Yeah, I mean, based on all of the webinars and publications and books and people that you've worked with that have worked through the institute, just a lot of good people and good things and good strides to help more people in the future. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you again, Steve. It was great to have you. And again, I learned a lot for myself personally, and I hope everybody else learned a lot. I hope that you stay dry and that San Diego and California don't get hit too hard. And good luck with your future research. And I hope to continue being connected to the autism research for myself and my education.
Okay, well, that'd be great. Okay, well, thank you for the time. And I just now have to go through my house and to see if I have any leaks or not.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. Okay, good. Nice seeing
All right.
everyone. Okay, bye then.
Bye.